They said punishment ends with pain, but this father turned cruelty into a ritual. When his strongest slave returned dead and his only daughter came back pregnant, the town buried the truth under silence. But some sins wrought too loudly to stay hidden. What really happened in that cabin still haunts the land to this day. Watch till the end, like the video, and subscribe for more dark stories. They said the colonel believed in order, not mercy. His plantation was run with the precision of a battlefield, his word law, his will unquestioned. But the story that followed was not about discipline. It was about what happens when cruelty disguises itself as lesson. One summer evening, witnesses recalled hearing him say, "If she cannot find worth through kindness, she will learn it through shame." Those words would stain his family name for generations. That night, he summoned his strongest enslaved man, a towering figure known for silence and obedience, and his only daughter, a young woman whose size and solitude had made her the target of her father's contempt. He told them they would live together in a remote cabin on the edge of his land. No explanation, no choice. He called it a test of virtue. The house servants whispered that it was not a lesson. It was punishment. The girl's tears had long dried into obedience, and the man's silence was his only defense. When the carriage left before dawn, carrying the two toward the cabin deep in the pines, no one spoke. But everyone watched. Days passed, then weeks. The colonel went about his affairs as though nothing had changed. Yet when the daughter finally returned, she was not the same. Her face had gone pale, her voice hollow, her body swollen with new life. And the man, his strongest, most loyal servant, never came back. The colonel said it was an accident. The overseer said the man ran into the swamp. But the field hands whispered a different story, that the night before she returned, they heard a scream echo across the woods, a single cry that rose and broke like a storm, followed by silence that lasted until morning. When the cabin was found days later, its door hung open, and the earth beneath it was black as if something had burned and buried itself there. Some say the colonel's punishment was meant to humiliate. Others believe it opened a door that was never meant to be touched. All that remains certain is this: one returned carrying a child, and the other never returned at all. So what truly happened inside that cabin? What did the colonel try to prove? And what did the land take in return? The world outside the plantation carried on, but within those acres of ordered cruelty, silence ruled like a second master. The colonel's estate stood high above the river, its white columns gleaming even under gray skies, a monument to control, to hierarchy, to the illusion that wealth could tame the human soul. To those who worked beneath him, he was both God and executioner, a man whose calm voice could bless one moment and condemn the next. He had fought wars, lost men, and returned home believing himself chosen to maintain discipline in a world he saw as weak. His daughter was his failure, or so he believed. She was his only child, heavy-bodied and soft-spoken, her laughter small and uncertain, her hands often trembling when he entered a room. To him she was proof that his bloodline had grown indulgent, corrupted by comfort. He blamed her weight, her isolation, her inability to marry. He called her a burden, not by name but by tone. She lived like a shadow in her own house, dining alone, reading by candlelight, listening to her father's soldiers tell stories of valor and punishment from the porch. The servants pitied her but kept their distance. She spoke kindly to them, offering smiles they dared not return, knowing that kindness from the wrong mouth could be mistaken for familiarity. It was said that the colonel once overheard her speaking gently to one of the enslaved men, a man whose strength was unmatched, whose eyes carried neither defiance nor fear. That single moment planted a seed in the colonel's mind that would grow into something monstrous. In the months that followed, whispers grew among the household staff. The colonel had begun keeping ledgers not of crops or weapons, but of people, measurements, tasks, weights, and diets. He spoke of balance, of reform, of how weakness could be corrected if one knew where to apply pressure. When his daughter began refusing meals, some believed she sought approval. Others thought she had learned that her body, in her father's eyes, was both sin and currency. Then came the evening that changed everything. A storm had passed, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth. The colonel called for the man known as the Iron Hand, a slave whose strength had once saved his overseer from a runaway cart. He was brought before the house, silent, his wrists bound loosely in respect rather than fear. The daughter stood nearby, eyes cast to the ground. The colonel looked between them, and with the same calm he used to issue military orders, declared that they would spend the next month together in the remote cabin at the edge of his property. He said it was time his daughter learned humility, and the man learned service beyond the field. No one dared question him. The wagon was prepared, provisions loaded, and before dawn they were gone. The house returned to quiet. The servants avoided one another's eyes, but the air felt charged, as though something sacred had been desecrated in plain sight. The colonel spent the morning on his porch, staring into the woods where the road disappeared. When his wife asked what purpose this served, he only said, "She will return a woman, and he will not return the same." No one understood what he meant then, but everyone remembered the way he said it, with the calm certainty of a man who believed himself God. The first week passed with no sign of them. Then 2, then 3. The colonel told the household staff to remain calm, that the cabin was stocked for a full season. But at night he lingered by the window, staring toward the woods as if waiting for something he had not foreseen. Servants whispered that the forest beyond the river held old spirits, ones that did not sleep, ones that punished cruelty disguised as righteousness. Yet the colonel believed in nothing beyond his own authority. He saw no superstition in what he had done, only order. To him, the cabin was not a place of exile. It was a crucible. But crucibles were built to melt things down, not restore them. When the first rider returned from the edge of the property, he brought back silence. The man would not speak of what he saw, only that the cabin smoke was thin, like from a fire left unattended. On the 9th week, the colonel rode out himself, taking 2 guards. The trail was overgrown, the air heavy, the smell of damp wood clinging to every breath. When they reached the cabin clearing, the horses refused to move forward. The colonel, impatient, dismounted and approached alone. The door was ajar, and inside he found his daughter sitting by the cold hearth, her face turned toward the wall, her hair tangled and wet with sweat. She did not move when he entered. The only sound in the room was the slow dripping of water from the ceiling and the faint rasp of her breathing. "Where is he?" he asked. She turned, her eyes glassy, her skin pale as wax. "Gone," she said softly. "You sent him away." The colonel looked around, the bed overturned, the windows boarded from inside. The smell of something metallic thick in the air. On the far side of the room lay a chain broken clean in half, the metal warped as though struck by impossible force. There were no bloodstains, no tracks, only the impression of a struggle that had ended without sound. Outside, the guards refused to come near. They said the air was colder, that the forest felt like it was listening. The colonel took his daughter home that evening. She did not speak the entire journey. At dinner, she ate nothing. At dawn, the doctor was summoned. He examined her in silence, then took the colonel aside. "She carries a child," he said. The colonel dismissed him with a shake of his head. He spent the rest of the day in his study, burning papers, tearing ledgers, muttering verses of scripture as if reciting a curse. By evening, the overseer arrived with news. 2 of the field hands had found footprints near the swamp, leading nowhere. In the mud, they discovered a torn scrap of cloth and something else. A silver ring crushed flat, its inscription unreadable. The colonel ordered it buried without another word. That night, thunder rolled without rain. The daughter wandered the halls, whispering to herself in the dark. When asked what she was saying, she answered only once. He said the sky was watching. No one dared ask her what that meant. The colonel's estate began to rot from the inside long before anyone dared to admit it. Servants spoke of sleepless nights filled with strange noises, footsteps on gravel when no one walked, voices low and indistinct moving along the verandas. The colonel dismissed it all, calling them cowards who feared the wind. But each morning he looked a little older, as if something followed him home from the woods that day he found his daughter. The air around him changed. He no longer shouted. He whispered. He locked his study doors, burned incense, and read from old religious texts until dawn. His wife, already fragile, began to lose her composure. She claimed to see the shape of a man standing at the edge of the garden, tall, unmoving, head bowed as though waiting for permission to enter. Rumors of the daughter's pregnancy spread through the town like sickness. The doctor left quietly one night, leaving behind a single note on his desk. The body cannot carry what the soul rejects. When the child quickened, the colonel forbade any mention of its father. Yet his daughter's silence was not submission. She moved through the house like someone sleepwalking between worlds, humming songs that no one recognized. Once, a servant found her standing at the window at dawn, her reflection shimmering oddly against the glass. When asked what she was looking at, she replied softly, "He said he will come when the ground remembers." One afternoon, a group of hunters returned from the swamp with a discovery. Deep in the cypress mud, they found a hand protruding from the water, skin blackened, veins like cords of ash. They thought it a trick of light until they saw the chain still around the wrist, snapped clean. The colonel ordered the body buried immediately, without blessing or record. The men obeyed, but when they returned the next day, the grave was open. Nothing inside, only a pool of standing water where the coffin had been. From that night forward, the house grew colder. Doors opened on their own, mirrors fogged though no one breathed near them, and the smell of iron filled the halls. The daughter's labor came early. She screamed only once, a sound that shook every wall of that house, and then fell silent. The midwife ran from the room, swearing she had seen something unnatural crawl across the floor. By morning, the colonel ordered every servant to leave. He locked the nursery and boarded its windows. No one knows what happened inside that room. Some said the child was stillborn. Others said it was taken away before dawn. What is known as this: the colonel emerged pale, trembling, his clothes stained as if from rain. He said the child would be buried at the edge of the woods, near the cabin. But those who watched him from afar claimed they saw him digging alone long past midnight, digging not one grave, but two. After that, no one spoke his name again. The colonel no longer ate at his own table. Meals went untouched, candles burned down to their bases. His daughter stayed locked in her room, a figure swallowed by silence. Servants said they heard her speaking softly to someone long after midnight, her tone calm, almost tender, as if soothing a child no one could see. One evening, a maid entered with a tray and found her sitting in the dark, humming to the empty crib near the window. When the maid asked who she was singing to, the daughter smiled faintly and whispered, "He is still here, waiting." The colonel's mind began to fracture. He started hearing knocks on his door at precise hours, always 3 times, always unanswered. He told his guards to dig up the graves near the woods, but when they reached the spot, the earth was undisturbed. They said the soil was dry as bone, though rain had fallen the night before. That night, the colonel stayed awake, writing feverishly in his journal about the weight of unseen eyes and the sin that breathes. When dawn came, he was found slumped over his desk, still alive but unresponsive, staring at a candle's dying flame, as though waiting for it to speak. In the days that followed, the house seemed to sink into a kind of waking death. The mirrors remained covered, windows sealed. The servants began to flee, some claiming they saw footprints on the ceiling, others swearing they heard a man's voice humming in the nursery. The colonel's wife vanished soon after, leaving no trace except a small gold locket on the stairwell floor, its clasp broken. The daughter grew thinner, her cheeks hollow, yet she carried herself with strange calm. She began walking through the halls barefoot, her hands dragging along the walls as if she were tracing invisible lines. The few who stayed said she spoke to the air as though to someone beside her. Once she was overheard saying, "You are free now, but I am not." On the last night anyone saw her, she went to the garden barefoot in the rain, the lantern light catching her pale figure through the window. A stable boy claimed he saw another shadow following her, tall and broad, its steps perfectly in sync with hers. When morning came, the daughter was gone. The colonel ordered the entire estate searched, every barn, every cellar. But she had left nothing behind, not even footprints. Only the faint echo of her lullaby seemed to linger, carried by the wind across the field. The colonel stopped speaking entirely after that. He spent his last months sitting in the same chair, facing the woods, whispering to the empty air, "You took her. You took them all." Some say he died that way, eyes open, body rigid, as if still waiting for an answer. Others say when they found him, there were 2 sets of footprints in the mud outside the porch, both leading into the forest, neither returning. The child was never found, and every spring when the ground softens with rain, the earth near the old cabin stirs, as though remembering something buried that refuses to stay silent. Years later, The story of the colonel's house became a caution whispered by travelers and preachers alike. No one owned the land for long. Every buyer left within a year, claiming sleepless nights, hollow knocks, and the sound of chains rattling just beneath the floorboards. The townsfolk called it the lesson ground. Children were warned not to walk too close to the edge of the woods where the cabin once stood. They said the soil there never settled, that no grass grew where the graves had been disturbed. Each time the wind passed through, it carried with it a low murmur, a voice too soft to name yet too heavy to ignore. When the property was finally surveyed decades later, the new owner, an ambitious historian, found 3 separate foundations buried beneath the overgrowth, as though the cabin had been rebuilt and burned multiple times. He found no headstones, no documents, but he discovered something else, a length of chain fused into the roots of an old oak. The metal was warped and twisted, the soil around it stained black, not with rust, but with something that smelled faintly of iron. The historian took it as an artifact. But that night, his campfire went out without a breeze, and by dawn, his horse had broken loose and fled into the swamp. Theories began to grow like weeds. Some said the enslaved man had not died by human hands, that the colonel's cruelty awakened something ancient buried in the land, something that demanded blood to silence it. Others believed the daughter's grief called it forth, that her sorrow had become an offering to the thing that dwelled beneath the trees. There were even those who whispered that the child she carried was never fully human, that its birth had split the line between the living and the damned. In the early 1900s, a priest attempted to cleanse the grounds. He brought a small congregation, candles, and a book of rites. They prayed until midnight. Witnesses claimed that during the final prayer, the priest's voice broke mid-sentence and never returned. His followers found him kneeling in the mud, his eyes wide open, staring toward the trees. The next morning, the group left without their leader, who was never seen again. His Bible remained on the ground, its pages soaked through, the ink on one line still visible, the living envy, the buried. By the 1930s, researchers called it folklore, but none could deny the physical signs, the strange patterns of rot, the cold spots even in summer, the animals that refused to enter. Local records noted a recurring phenomenon. Every generation, someone who ventured too deep into those woods disappeared, and each time, the ground near the cabin swelled and cracked as if something beneath it had been disturbed again. Modern investigators tried to rationalize it. Magnetic anomalies, methane pockets, optical illusions. Yet recordings taken near the site captured whispers that none could explain. They always began as static, then deepened into the sound of 2 voices overlapping, one pleading, the other answering in tones that were almost kind. The final seconds of one recording contained a single phrase, barely audible. The lesson is not over. No one stays on that land after dark now. It is said that when the moon is low, you can see a woman's silhouette standing by the ruined porch, her dress soaked and her hands resting over an empty cradle. Behind her stands a man's shadow, broad, motionless, waiting. And if you listen long enough, you may hear the faint creak of a chain sliding through the dirt, tightening once more. Time tried to bury the story, but the ground refused to keep its secrets. Decades passed, generations rose and vanished, yet the land remained untouched, a scar carved into the heart of the county. What was once the colonel's estate was now nothing more than ruins swallowed by trees. The porch collapsed into the soil, and the cabin's foundation hidden beneath tangled roots. Still, every year, on the same week when the daughter was said to have returned home, the earth around the site stirred. Locals claimed to hear footsteps pacing where no paths remained, the echo of a lullaby drifting from the river, and a single lantern flickering at the tree line before vanishing into the fog. No one had lived there in over a century, yet the land still breathed like something restless beneath it. A team of documentarians arrived in the late 1970s, hoping to uncover what they called the curse of the colonel's lesson. They found fragments, charred wood, rusted tools, remnants of what appeared to be a cradle, and beneath that, the faint outline of a grave that had been dug and refilled countless times. The soil inside was soft, unlike the earth around it, and carried an odor they could not name. Their cameras malfunctioned, batteries drained, and their audio recordings captured strange interference, voices whispering too low to belong to wind. One crew member claimed he saw a figure standing between the trees, a tall man, bare-chested, head bowed, holding something limp in his arms. The others found only footprints that vanished halfway across the clearing. They abandoned the project, leaving their footage behind. Years later, the reels were recovered, but half the film had melted as if burned from within. Locals speak now of the place with reverence, not fear. They say the land itself punishes those who seek to profit from pain. They say that on quiet nights, when the fog is heavy and the river runs high, you can still see the colonel's daughter wandering near the water, humming that same lullaby she once sang to her unseen child. Some swear she is alone. Others say a man walks beside her, tall, silent, his movements too smooth to be human. No one approaches. The last person who tried was a hunter who returned home at dawn, trembling and speechless, his hair turned completely white. When he finally spoke, all he said was, "He's still digging." In recent years, the area has been fenced off by the state. They call it a conservation site, though no one guards it after dark. The last ranger assigned there quit after claiming he heard someone whisper his name through the static of his radio. The files from his post remain sealed, but his final report included one line typed in trembling script. "The soil moves when you look away." The story endures not because of its horror, but because of its weight, the way cruelty ripples through generations, the way pride becomes its own haunting. Some say the colonel built his house upon sacred ground and awakened what he could never understand. Others believe the haunting was justice itself, a balance restored, not cursed. Whatever the truth, the lesson remains carved into the bones of that place. Some sins echo long after the voices that committed them have gone silent. And if you ever stand near that forgotten land at dusk, when the wind shifts and the mist begins to crawl, you may hear the sound of chains dragging slowly through the dirt, followed by a woman's quiet hum, and the low, steady heartbeat of something that has never truly died. If this story unsettled you, it means you are still listening to the echoes of the past. Like this video, share it with someone who believes cruelty can be buried, and subscribe, because some stories never rest, and neither should the truth.